Saint Teresa of Avila confirmed the terrifying silence before divine judgment. What happens in the final instant when the soul slips from the body and stands on the edge of eternity? Why does Scripture describe God's voice as both thunder and whisper, and yet the saints speak of a silence that terrifies more than any sound? What is this hush, this immense, awe-laden pause before the beginning of judgment? Teresa of Avila often wrote that the soul is suddenly drawn into a vastness that has no walls, and in that vastness she recognized something beyond words, a silence so absolute it felt alive. It was not emptiness, it was presence. It was the moment before the king speaks. The mystics call it the silence of God, a threshold where every mask falls away. Saint Teresa described it as the instant when the soul sees itself as God sees it, not yet judged, not yet condemned or consoled, but utterly known. In her visions, this moment arrived like the pause between a lightning flash and the thunder that follows. The flash was the truth of one's entire life unveiled. The silence was the soul's response to that truth. She wrote of one particular vision in which God allowed her to contemplate a soul at that very threshold. She saw a person who had just died, still holding the faint warmth of the body, suddenly standing in a luminous expanse without horizon. The soul did not hear angels or demons, nor the voice of God, not yet. Only silence. But in that silence, everything was revealed. The weight of every choice, the sincerity of every prayer, the hidden intentions behind every good or evil deed. It was a silence that stripped away illusions. No excuses, no negotiations, no distractions. Saint Teresa said that in this moment, the soul experiences a clarity so piercing that even the smallest unconfessed sin appears enormous, and every sincere act of love shines brighter than the sun. And still, God waits. This is what terrified her. Not the wrath of God, but the patience of God. His silence is not indifference. It is mercy giving the soul one final instant to behold its truth before the word of judgment is spoken. It is the pause of a father who desires salvation, yet honors freedom. The Catechism echoes this mystery when it teaches that at the moment of death each person undergoes the particular judgment, standing before Christ who reveals the heart. Saint Teresa's visions place us inside the interior drama of that teaching. In her imagery, Christ's gaze is like a mirror of blazing purity. The soul cannot hide, it cannot flee. It can only behold and be beholden. And so the terrifying silence is not the absence of God, but the fullness of His truth. It is the stillness of a soul realizing that everything it chose in life is now eternal. What does it mean for a soul to be seen entirely, without shadow, without pretense, without anything left concealed? How does a creature endure the unveiled gaze of the Creator? These were the questions that stirred in Saint Teresa of Avila whenever she wrote of the moment following the soul's entry into the terrible, holy silence before judgment. She described that silence as the doorway through which the soul steps into a deeper revelation, the gaze of Christ. At first, there is only stillness, vast, luminous, almost unbearable. But then comes perception, not through the ears, but through the very depths of the spirit. The soul senses someone looking, not with the scrutiny of an accuser, nor with the apathy of a distant judge, but with a knowledge so complete it feels like fire. Teresa said that the gaze of Christ is gentle, yet it pierces, tender, yet immovable. It does not condemn, it simply reveals. And revelation itself is judgment. In one of her ecstasies, she saw a soul who had just crossed the threshold of death and felt for the first time that divine gaze. It was not a vision of Christ in bodily form, but an overwhelming awareness of His presence, closer than breath, brighter than all created light. The soul was illuminated from within, as though a torch had been lit in the very center of its being. Every virtue glowed with celestial beauty. Every sin cast a shadow that could no longer be ignored. The soul stood naked in truth. Teresa explained that this is why the saints speak of fear, not fear of God's cruelty, for He has none, but fear of His holiness, which exposes all that is unholy in us. The soul, she wrote, understands at once its misery and its magnificence. Misery from sin, magnificence from being loved by so great a Lord. The scriptures echo the same mystery, for nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Luke 8:17. At death, this prophecy is fulfilled in an instant, and yet, even as the soul trembles, there is consolation. Christ's gaze is unwavering love, a love that does not lie, a love that refuses to flatter, a love that heals only by first revealing the wound. Teresa insisted that no soul, not even the darkest, could endure that gaze without being offered mercy. Still, mercy does not force itself. In the silence, the soul must answer. Will it turn toward that gaze, accepting truth, accepting love, accepting judgment as justice and mercy intertwined? Or will it turn away, preferring the shadows it formed in life to the light that now seeks to purify it? This inner turning, she taught, shapes the entire outcome of judgment itself. What happens after the soul feels the unbearable, tender gaze of Christ? What follows the silence and the illumination? Saint Teresa of Avila taught that the next moment is not a courtroom scene filled with noise and accusation, but a solemn unveiling, gentle, orderly, and terrifying in its clarity. It is the moment when the truth of one's life begins to speak, and when the angels step forward. Teresa wrote that as soon as the soul turns either toward or away from Christ's gaze, the memories of its earthly life rise like flames in darkness. Not chaotic, not rushed, but perfectly arranged. The soul sees its entire story from the inside out. It understands what love was offered, what graces were ignored, what sins were clung to, what acts of mercy secretly delighted God. Every moment glimmers with meaning. Nothing is wasted. Nothing disappears. She described it as a luminous unraveling, in which the soul perceives that God has been following, guiding, warning, consoling at every step. Even the smallest events, forgotten by the world, shine with divine intention. And the soul at last understands the weight of its freedom. Then, according to her visions, the angels appear. They do not accuse, nor do they defend with noise. They simply present the truth of the soul's cooperation with God's grace. They reveal each prayer offered, each temptation resisted, each small act of love that no one witnessed, except heaven. These are presented not as arguments but as realities. Teresa insisted that the soul is overwhelmed by how many times God tried to lift it, strengthen it, rescue it. Even the slightest movement of the heart toward the good becomes a jewel in the angel's hands. Then the fallen spirits approach, she wrote, but not as masters, not as triumphant enemies. They appear only to expose the choices through which the soul aligned with darkness. They speak no lies in this moment, for deception is swallowed by divine truth. They simply stand as witnesses to the soul's consent to sin, and their presence alone is enough for the soul to understand its own responsibility. Teresa said, this is why their appearance produces such horror, not because they come with power, but because they come with truth. In this solemn exchange, no voice raises itself above Christ's gaze. It is judgment without noise, she said. What terrifies the soul is not accusation, but clarity. What humbles the soul is not an angel's testimony, but the unmistakable knowledge that God offered mercy at every turn. Teresa describes this stage as the heart's final awakening. The soul at last sees the full story of its existence as God saw it from the beginning. And in that revelation, one question becomes unavoidable. Will the soul surrender to the God who pursued it all its life? Or will it cling to the very chains it forged in freedom? This decision, subtle yet eternal, is the threshold of judgment. What happens when the soul has seen everything, its sins, its virtues, its forgotten moments of grace, and stands trembling before the unwavering gaze of Christ? Saint Teresa of Avila taught that after the unveiling of the soul's entire life, a moment comes that is more mysterious, more decisive, and more tender than anything that preceded it. She called it the final invitation of mercy. Teresa insisted that even after the truth of one's life is exposed, Christ does not yet pronounce judgment. Instead, there is a pause, a sacred interval where divine love reaches toward the soul with one last, burning offer. It is not a second chance after death, nor a rewriting of earthly choices. Rather, it is the soul's final response to the truth it now beholds with perfect clarity. She described this moment as a radiance that expands from Christ, a warmth that washes over the soul like a tide. It is not a feeling but a revelation. The soul sees unmistakably that God has loved it every moment of its existence, loved it when it resisted him, loved it when it forgot him, loved it when it sinned against him, loved it when he seemed absent, loved it when he seemed silent. The soul understands now that every heartbeat of its earthly life was enclosed in divine mercy, and Christ, in this moment, silently invites the soul to surrender, to trust the one who loved it unto death. Teresa wrote that this invitation is both majestic and gentle. Christ does not compel, he does not argue, he does not negotiate. He simply is love, standing before the soul in all his wounded glory, asking nothing but acceptance. The soul knows instantly that to accept this love is to accept purification, truth, humility, and the letting go of all self-deception. But Teresa warned, for some souls, this moment is agony. Why? Because divine mercy requires the soul to acknowledge its need for it. For the humble, this is liberation. They fall into Christ like a child running into its Father's arms. They embrace the truth revealed in judgment, accepting purification, whether mild or fierce, as the work of God's healing fire. But the proud soul trembles. Such a soul sees that accepting Christ's love means acknowledging the ways it rejected love in life. It sees that surrender requires repentance, vulnerability, and the letting go of illusions that once shielded the ego. Teresa wrote that some souls recoil, not because God condemns them, but because his love exposes the falsehoods to which they clung. She described this as the tragedy of freedom. God invites, but the soul chooses. In her visions, the angels wait breathlessly at this moment. Heaven bends close. The saints intercede. Christ stands with his heart open, still wounded for love of the one standing before him. Nothing has been decided yet. The soul must speak, not with words, but by turning either toward the light or away from it. And in that turning, eternity is shaped. What happens in the very instant the soul responds to Christ's final invitation of mercy? St. Teresa of Avila taught that this moment, the soul's turning, is the hinge on which eternity swings. Not a dramatic gesture, not a spoken declaration, but a quiet, interior movement of the deepest freedom. A choice made with perfect clarity, with nothing hidden and nothing misunderstood. Teresa described it as the most solemn moment in the existence of any human soul. For the first time, the soul truly knows God and truly knows itself. Its illusions have fallen, its excuses have dissolved, its self-made stories collapse in the face of divine truth. Now only one question remains. Does the soul choose love? If the soul turns toward Christ, even trembling, even ashamed, even wounded, Teresa said it is immediately surrounded by the tenderness of heaven. Angels draw near with a joy that is silent and luminous. They do not celebrate with noise, but with a radiance that strengthens the soul for the purification to come. For to turn toward Christ is to step willingly into the fire of his love, a fire that burns away the remnants of sin, heals all distortion, and refines the soul until it reflects his glory. Such souls enter judgment with hope. They do not fear purification, for they understand that Christ's justice is his mercy in action. Teresa wrote that these souls run into the heart that once they feared, knowing that even the flames of purgation are the work of love, restoring what sin disfigured. These souls are not lost, they are being completed. But what of the soul that turns away? Here Teresa's descriptions become grave. The soul that rejects Christ's final invitation does not do so out of ignorance or confusion. It now sees truth perfectly. It understands God fully. And yet pride or despair may tighten around its freedom like iron, driving it to retreat into the very shadows from which God sought to rescue it. It is not pushed away. It is not cast out by divine anger. It withdraws. Teresa wrote that such a soul flees from the light because the light reveals what it refuses to surrender. The angels step back in sorrow. Heaven falls silent. Christ's gaze remains loving, but his respect for freedom is absolute. The soul chooses an eternity without the God it refused to love in truth. The silence that follows this turning is deeper than the first, a silence not of invitation, but of consequence. The soul recognizes instantly what it has chosen, separation from the one for whom it was created, and this realization, Teresa said, is a sorrow beyond earthly comprehension, not imposed, but embraced by the soul itself. Yet for those who turn toward Christ, even weakly, even with a mustard seed of trust, judgment becomes a passage into healing. Teresa insisted that no soul turning toward him is lost. One movement of the heart, she wrote, and the gates of mercy open like dawn. And now, with the soul's choice made, the last stage of judgment begins. What remains after the soul has made its eternal turning, toward Christ or away from him? Saint Teresa of Avila taught that once the soul's freedom has spoken its final silent yes or no, the moment of divine judgment finally arrives. Not the dreadful tribunal imagined by earthly minds, but the serene, unshakable pronouncement of the Word who is truth. Teresa described this moment as the end of silence. For throughout the soul's unveiling, throughout the revelations, throughout the final invitation of mercy, Christ has spoken only with his gaze. Now, at last, his voice is heard, not with sound, but with an interior proclamation that resounds through the entire being of the soul. She said that Christ's judgment is not a sentence imposed from outside. It is the naming of what already exists. It is the confirmation of the soul's own turning. It is the truth made definitive. For the soul that turned toward Christ, Teresa wrote that the voice of the Lord is like the dawn breaking over a long night. The soul feels itself lifted by love, sometimes into glory, sometimes into purification, but always into hope. Christ's judgment for such souls is radiant clarity. Come, beloved, let justice heal you, let mercy perfect you. The soul understands instantly that even the fires of purgation are not punishment but medicine. Not rejection, but divine tenderness that purifies like gold tested in flame. Teresa saw these souls carried by angels into the realms where God's healing love reshapes them into the full beauty for which they were created. And they go willingly, joyfully, with tears of gratitude, because nothing separates them from the one they have chosen. But for the soul that has turned away, Teresa's tone becomes solemn and trembling. She taught that Christ does not speak condemnation. He simply affirms the soul's own choice. His words, though still filled with sorrowing love, seal what the soul has already decided in perfect freedom. Teresa wrote that this is the deepest mystery of judgment. Hell is not imposed. It is embraced by the soul that cannot bear the light. Christ's voice for such souls is not harsh. It is heartbreakingly gentle. Let it be done according to your choice. At that moment, the soul descends into the separation it has chosen. Not thrust down by divine wrath, but sinking into the self-made abyss that rejects love. Teresa said that the greatest suffering of the damned is the knowledge that God loved them fully, and that they refused that love forever. Heaven does not rejoice. Christ does not triumph. Love mourns, but justice stands. And for those who choose him, even imperfectly, joy breaks forth like a song that has been waiting since the foundations of the world. Angels rejoice, saints welcome, and the soul enters its true homeland. Teresa ended her reflections on judgment not with fear, but with hope. She insisted that God gives every soul every possible chance, every grace, every invitation. Judgment, she said, is the moment where the truth of love is revealed and the truth of freedom is honored, and in that final, eternal stillness, the soul beholds the face of the one who has pursued it since the moment it was conceived. The silence before divine judgment is terrifying, yes, but it is also beautiful because in that silence God waits for love,